Welcome to episode 4 of the Barbecue, Booze, and Life podcast, the ultimate fusion of smoky flavors, spirited libations, and the vibrant tapestry of living life to the fullest. Hosted by me, George. This podcast is a sizzling celebration of the art of barbecue and the myriad adventures that make life truly remarkable. Now, there's enough people out there that are fear-mongering and spreading negativity. And I wanted to start this podcast because there's already enough of that other shit out there. And I feel like if there's going to be anything that brings us all together, it's going to be that crackling sound of wood and charcoal with some glorious meats being cooked over it. I thought I'd kick off this episode with a funny story. A few years ago, one of my wife's cousins got married, and I had volunteered to cook for the weekend. So it's about 9 or 10 a.m. on the first day. It's a Saturday, and I'm starting the fire to get ready for lunch. So naturally, when you got a fire going, it's totally appropriate to open up, say a beer. All right, so I've got a Modelo. I'm enjoying myself, listening to some smooth jazz. When the cousin's older brother walks over, he looks at me and he says, "George, you think it's a little early to be drinking a beer?" And then I turned and I looked at him. I didn't even feel like his observation warranted a response. And I just turned back and continued stoking the fire. All right, so it doesn't matter what time of day it is. If you got a fire going and you're getting ready to cook, it does not hurt, of course, responsibly, to open up a bottle of your favorite libation. All right, so in this episode, we're going to head on over to Missouri. Now, today I'm only going to cover St. Louis style barbecue, all right? I'm not going to go head down to Kansas City, which is already a touchy subject. And I'm not sure if I can talk about Kansas City, Missouri, or Kansas City, Kansas. So we're eventually going to get there, but today I'm only going to talk about St. Louis style barbecue. Now, before I get to the ribs and the type of cut and all that and their cooking method, etc., there's a commonality that I'm finding in a lot of barbecue in the region, okay? And that's immigrant influence, specifically Czech and German. Now, when we're talking about the history of St. Louis style barbecue, we're specifically talking about the influences from German immigrants in the region. So the St. Louis style barbecue has its roots dating back to the mid-19th century, when it was a real popular settlement for German immigrants. With their immigration, they brought their love of pork and, of course, their grilling techniques. And if you recall from episodes 1 and 2, we briefly talked about where that indirect style cooking comes from. And it comes from the German immigrants. All right. So there's a very pork-centric tradition. St. Louis has become a hub for pork processing, and it's been influenced, of course, by the preferences of pork in the local barbecue scene. Pork spare ribs in particular, have become a staple. Now, if you haven't seen the spare rib, these are different from the baby backs, all right? The baby backs are cut from the top of the rib cage, near the backbone, and the spare ribs are cut from the bottom of the rib cage. So that's why when you look at the spare ribs, they're much longer than the baby backs. The baby backs, one whole rack could probably feed a very, very hungry adult. The spare ribs, probably could also feed a very, very hungry adult, but there's a lot more meat on them. The baby backs are mostly bone, almost an equal amount of bone and meat. Okay, so if you haven't cooked spare ribs, I highly recommend them. You can use the same techniques to cook them that you could just the baby backs. They cook a little slower, and personally, I tend to enjoy them more. Actually, depending upon what we plan on doing, but I can get a slab of spare ribs and have leftovers for our family of 4. And you want to make sure, you make them nice and pretty and shape them properly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the evolution of this unique cut. All right, over time, the local barbecue culture in St. Louis evolved, and they started to incorporate various seasoning methods and sauce, which created a really great, flavorful, and balanced profile that's associated with the style that you see today in St. Louis. It certainly has made its mark, arguably not like Texas, but it certainly made its mark in barbecue culture in the broad landscape across the country. And it certainly contributed to the diverse regional styles that you see today that we enjoy all over the states. However, Texas is still king. All right, that's my little Texas plug. So, what do we know about St. Louis style barbecue? Again, just sticking with the ribs, they focus on the spare ribs, which I had mentioned earlier are trimmed in a rectangular shape for even cooking. Some folks, they leave all the bits on, and then at the end of the cook, they might chop off the ends and try to make burnt ends, or they might use it for something else, but serve it separately from the ribs. Some people trim them off. I like to trim everything off before, and then I'll smoke it separate, and then I'll just kind of snack on it with whoever's around when it's done cooking. So it'll typically cook faster than the ribs. So, of course, you want to go low and slow. I've seen some people pre-cook them in the oven or the crock pot. That is just a sin. God does not want you to do that. Okay, He does not want you to put your ribs in a slow cook. Yes, it's good. Yes, I'm sure it tastes good. Yes, I'm sure you could put it in your oven or whatever, or your gas burner, and throw some wood chips in there, and you could maybe fake out your guests that don't know any better. But that is the ultimate sin. If I ever catch anyone boiling their meat in a crock pot and call it barbecue, you're going to suffer the consequences. All right, so they're typically slow cooked. I've seen people, they'll grill them and they'll hit them with some indirect heat afterwards, or they'll do the reverse sear method where they're doing indirect heat, they're using indirect heat, they smoke them and then they grill them at the end. I personally just like cooking them indirectly. Okay, this gives the ribs time to absorb, the flavors of the rub, especially if you just seasoned it shortly before you started cooking, and helps them become more tender. So in St. Louis, they're real big on sauces. In Texas, we prefer that the meat and the seasoning does all the talking, but St. Louis are really big on sauces. Almost reminds me of, those ribs you'd find in a Chinese buffet. No offense, Missouri. I'm sure you make up the difference down south in Kansas City and all that. But the barbecue sausage range from sweet and tangy to mildly spicy. So you get this really diverse flavor profile. One of the places that we ate at when I was visiting in 2019, my wife was there working briefly. We ate at Pappy's, which is a very famous chain, a very famous barbecue spot in St. Louis. And it was good. The ribs were good. It was Pappy's Smokehouse. I really enjoyed it. Again, I am very biased when it comes to barbecue, and there's some people out there that say Texas ain't shit. But yeah, I enjoyed it. So if you're in the St. Louis area, check out Pappy's. There's a lot of other great spots. We only made it to Pappy's there. And check it out. I think you really get a kick out of it. I certainly did. So usually when we're eating ribs there, some popular sides, and I experienced this at Pappy's, were like baked beans, coleslaw, and potato salad, of course. My favorite go-tos, especially when we're doing some ribs. Maybe some mac and cheese. Maybe some greens. Now, let's revisit cooking methods. Now, but going back to the first few episodes where we talked about the 3-2-1 methods and just wrapping your ribs and things like that. I know there's a lot of people out there that wrap them. I've never wrapped them. I've tried wrapping them once before. I've tried doing the 3-2-1 method. I don't really feel like wrapping them adds any real value. Some people do just because they like the sauces. They want to get that hit of apple or honey, or they like to use butter or whatever. And I see some challenging opinions on that online. There's a lot of folks saying that trying to infuse that apple flavor into the ribs, it's not existent. And I can't agree or disagree with that because I don't do it. So I don't know. But what I will tell you is when I'm cooking white meat, I certainly like to use oak or any kind of fruit wood. Now, I used to smoke with mesquite. Some people swear by mesquite. I like to use mesquite charcoal. I certainly like to use mesquite charcoal when I cook, when I'm searing things, that or oak. But I don't personally like the flavor of hickory or mesquite. So when you're smoking with wood, I think a lot of that might come from me using dirty smoke, possibly. And what dirty smoke is when you're cooking, you have this, well, I'm generalizing here, but you have a preconceived notion that you need to see the smoke. Like if that smoke's not rolling, that smoke's not coming out of your smokestack, that you're not cooking. And that is false. If you see smoke coming out of your smokestack like that, really thick smoke, more than likely you're working with dirty smoke, which will give your food a pretty bitter flavor. And I think that's basically what might have been happening to me. And usually that happens because there's something wrong with your fuel source. I need to do a little bit more research on it. I might think it might have something to do. Maybe there might be some bark left over, or it's somehow contaminated or wasn't processed properly. I'm not entirely sure on why that would happen. But you want to avoid that. Your smoke almost wants to be, when you refuel it, yeah, you're going to see a little bit of smoke. But when it settles down, it almost wants to be clear. You almost want that clear, almost, clear smoke coming out. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I felt like it was important to go when we're in Missouri to talk about St. Louis style barbecue and a little bit of history of it. There's a lot of contention when it goes when it comes to the border with Kansas, and I wanted to combine the two in this episode, but I thought, hey, maybe that might be something better left for its own, and we'll cover that in episode 5. I hope you enjoyed today's adventure. If you like what you heard today, subscribe and follow. All the details will be in the comments section or in my bio. Follow me on TikTok at Barbecue Booze and Life 4. Follow me on YouTube at Barbecue Booze and Life. Instagram at Barbecue Booze and Life. And coming soon, there's going to be a blog and a X, formerly Twitter profile. All right, I hope you're doing well out there. Thanks for listening today. Take care and grill on.